estate percentage, but just to give you an idea how one would go about qualifying or some of the things that you need to know. So there's a couple ways that you can qualify, and Carolyn will go into more depth, but you can go in and say, this is how much I make, Carolyn. How much can I afford to buy? Or you can go with I just saw a $400,000 house. How much down do I need to put down to qualify? So, I mean, it kind of depends on where you are in the real estate procedures. So let's talk about this. I think we had a letter in from Bob from Vieira, and he wanted to know some specifics based on his information.
Okay. And again, things are going to change, and interest rates do change also, and so do rules. But in Bob's situation, based on his salary, what we were trying to do is work. There's all different ways to work. I call it backwards or forwards, but we were working with his salary, and he wanted to know how much home he could afford based on what his income was. So what we did is we take his income and we divide that by 12, his annual salary.
And his annual salary is how much?
I think it was roughly about $65,000. So we take that and divide that by 12, and a standard qualification ratio for people out there who want to play around on their own would be a comfortable number is 45% of that number. Once you have that figure, you take away any other debts that you have, such as car loans, credit cards, student loans, any co-signing for kids or family members on any other loans. You don't minus out any of your utilities, cable, cell phone bills, things like that. You don't have to consider. But in his situation, he didn't have, I think he had a car loan and he had one credit card. So what we did is we took that 45% of that monthly gross income, so before taxes are taken out, so your gross income, and that was left with a figure. Once we have that figure, we're going to estimate what we think taxes and insurance are going to be. And being that we're here local in Florida, I can lean on Jean or John also to help with figuring out property taxes and things like that. And then we minus out those two figures. And, of course, if there is any mortgage insurance, depending on how much. But I think in Bob's situation, he was putting 20% down. So then it would be left with roughly about $1,500 or so for a monthly payment. And that would get him about $330,000 on a mortgage loan. So we can work that way. And sometimes, too, just talking with people, we find out what their comfort level is.
Right.
And we can work with that figure. If they say, I don't want to have a mortgage or a home payment less than or no more than $1,400. So then we can work with that. We can go backwards on that. Take away taxes, take away insurance.
The beauty of the mortgage world and my background, although I am a lawyer with a law degree, my undergraduate degree was in math computer science.
Okay.
So I do have a math background, and I do enjoy, that's odd, but I do enjoy the math aspect of it. It's very simple,
like
really. There's a lot of formulas, a lot of numbers, but you put them on paper, and the bottom line is fixed every time. 2 + 2 is 4 every single time. So it makes it, very easy for Carolyn to do her job. Yes. Not to say that her job is easy, don't get me wrong. Pulling all those numbers together and getting them accurately on paper is the critical part, and knowing which numbers count and which don't. Again, that's why you need a professional to do it for you. But in the end, you crunch the numbers, and here's what you can afford. And while we can tweak it a little one way or the other through some machinations, the bottom line is the bottom line, which does, again, to a math person like me, makes it comforting.
Yes.
So for those people that haven't purchased a home for many years, it used to be two numbers that you looked at. You looked at your PITI, or principal, interest, taxes, and insurance.
Right.
And it used to be a kind of a rule of thumb was 1 week's paycheck, gross paycheck, was about what you were supposed to spend on your interest or on your mortgage payment. It was like 28%, but we always used to say about 1 week's worth. Now, those two formulas of PITI over your entire total debt ratio has gone away, and it's just mostly total debt ratio at this point.
Well, they're both still in play. For sure. I mean, there's still always going to be that PITI ratio and then that total debt ratio. But when people are trying to figure out what they can qualify for, and if they, if I'm helping them calculate it, we're going to go on the total, because that's really the ultimate bottom line is how much can I afford with everything else that I have?
Let's talk really quickly. We didn't touch on this at any of our other shows, but alimony and child support. If you're spending it out, it's against you, but if you're collecting it, it works for you as far as a income.
Right. One key tip, that's actually a good point. With alimony and child support, in order to use that income, the children typically need to have at least 3 more years left as far as their age. We of course, we're going to get the documentation to verify, because sometimes it's not 18 that cuts it off. It depends on the schooling and that kind of thing. But go ahead.
Question pops into my head. What about the proverbial deadbeat dad? So we have a court order for my 8-year-old. This is not me. I said that randomly. For an 8-year-old. And so obviously he's got more than 3 years remaining, but dad has not been paying the child support. Is the intended income count, or does it have to be actual?
So that one's always kind of a double bummer, because one, obviously the person's not getting the income that they solely deserve, and then we cannot count it. So we do have to verify that it is coming in and it's consistent. All
right. One of the things that we talked about in the last show, and kind of segue into that, is this idea of preparation. In other words, we're talking about all the things you need to do to qualify for a loan. A lot of this stuff is planning. That's why you're certified mortgage planners, because you plan for the event. You don't call up and say, I need a loan tomorrow. What do I need to do? It's rather, I'm contemplating purchasing a home. Those of you who are ahead of the game, ahead of the curve. Now, of course, Carolyn will be happy to help the procrastinators out there as well. But part of the idea of this show is to provide useful information for those of you listening. Preparation and planning will make the process go much smoother, as well as save you a substantial amount of money, because, again, we talked about this total debt ratio, the DTI, debt to income ratio. You might be making a lot of money, but if you've got a lot of debt, it's into your ability to pay the loan. If you speak with Carolyn and she says, okay, let's look at your debt. What can we do to reduce it? What can we do to improve your credit score? Right. And it might take 3, 6, 9 months to do that, but it could save you thousands of dollars or tens of thousands over the years. Right.
I can say that I have talked to 3 different people this week thinking that they were ready to go, and they're not. Not to say, now they have the steps and they know what they need to do, but they were thinking they were ready to go right away, and they weren't, just based on a couple little things. But we gave them the advice, told them what they need to do, so they will be ready 6 months. So if you're thinking about it, it doesn't hurt to just give us a call, and we can have the chat and let you know, okay, great, you're ready to go. Keep doing exactly what you're doing, and when you're ready in 6 months, give us a call. Or, hey, there are a couple little tweaks that you can maybe do, improve your credit score, and then we'll be ready to go in 6 months.
I know I'm working with someone right now that I actually met over a year ago, but their circumstances they thought they were ready to buy a home, but they couldn't. So we've been working with them over a year to get them to the point where they now are set up. They've got all their ducks in a row. Right. They've done everything. One of the things that I think is great when you do a planning like this is a lot of people they've never run their own credit. They have no idea what their credit scores are. Right. And they run them and they find out, oh my gosh, I thought I had good credit and I've got poor credit because maybe someone has stolen their identity or done something that has affected their credit, and they are not aware of that. If they wait till the last minute to try to get a loan, and now they've got to try to fix all those problems. Right. You need to be running your credit at least once a year on these free credit score sites, because you want to know, if somebody been out there using your identity? Is your credit still good? How can you make it better? Yeah. And we touched on a few things on the last week's show. But now let's talk about, how do you get together maybe those first-time home buyers or the people that need to gather some income together, and what do you need to know that you can, different ways that you can save for down payment?
There's lots of great different ways you can save for a down payment. My first and foremost is, just like when you have a job and you start saving for your 401k, create that savings account. Start with the $50 or $100 and just keep putting it away. And, if you start early enough and you kind of forget about that income, that money, the next thing you know, you have it built up, and it's going to build up quite quickly.
Especially if it's taken right out of your paycheck.
Right.
It's the old Christmas club, or whatever it is.
Exactly,
you put it right in automatically.
And just so some people out there don't realize either that you don't necessarily have to have 20% down. I mean, there are programs where you can get in as little as 3.5% down. or if you were ex-military or still active, it's 100%, so you don't need down payment.
I know there's so many myths that people have, especially if you haven't purchased a home in the last 10 or 15 years, that there's some things out there for first-time home buyers. We call them seasoned home buyers, but I didn't want people to think they were only buying during our winter season because they came down.
Right.
Now these are seasoned, being that they're experienced buyers. But there's one of the things that people don't think of is that you want to talk about this, ask the seller for help?
Sellers can help with closing costs. They cannot help with your down payment. So you always have to have the down payment either come from yourself, could be a gift from a family member, church organization, and or a down payment assistance program. But sellers can help with closing costs. So maybe you've saved up enough for the down payment, but there are closing costs. There's costs to buy and sell property. So the sellers can help with that portion. So you are able to put more of your money into the down payment and let the seller help with closing costs. There are limits.
Yeah, when I prepare contracts, wearing my attorney hat and preparing contracts for clients, what I always recommend and do myself, depending on who I'm representing, is I reach out to you or the lender and ask, are there limits? In other words, I have a seller who's willing to give $20,000 to help. Well, that's probably too much. Again, it depends on the percentage, of course. Yes. But are there rules of thumb, 3%, 6%, things like that, where when drafting the contract, the lender will approve a 6% closing cost credit, but not a repair credit or some such something?
Yes. It all depends on if it's a primary residence, second home, or investor, and how much they're putting down.
Okay. So
there's going to be percentages. There's going to be no seller credit. There's going to be 2%. There's 3%. There's 6%. There's 4%, and there's unlimited.
Okay. So, again, check with your loan officer.
Board of Mortgages.
Yes. Yes.
We discussed that last week, that the difference between going to your local bank, and they might only have one or two programs to offer you as far as mortgages. When you go to Carolyn Wolf with Certified Mortgage Planners, she is a broker, which means you have dozens of different types of mortgages that you can offer to your clients, because everybody doesn't quite fit the same mold. And it's good to know those things up front, because one of the things we always point out, and I don't know, it's one of my favorite tips, and I guess we always try to discuss it, is if you're using that calculations of 45% of your what is
income.
The income?
Gross
Thank
income.
You. Gross income. Thank you.
Right.
Of your gross income for all to total all your PITI as well as your debt, ongoing debt, and that is monthly charges. That's not, you don't use electric, which you think you would use that, but you have to use something like a boat payment or a car payment. If you are under, give us that number again, is it under 10 months of car payments, they do not count against you for your debt ratio?
Less than 10 months, correct.
Less than 10
as long
months.
as it's an installment loan, though. A lot of people this is another tricky tip, is if it's a lease, it still gets counted. Sometimes, too, depending on, again, the whole picture of the borrower, they might still consider it depending on everything. But the general rule is less than 10 months. And I did want to point out as well, as far as us, leaning on each other. And that's one reason why I like having you, Jean, and you, John, is that there's a lot of times I can reach out to you folks for your knowledge as far as attorney or title or real estate when we're trying to calculate and figure out what the best product and avenue is for a buyer.
That's right.
I always tell people you need to know the individual, the totality of the circumstances of my client, not generically speaking. I can give you generic answers, and I get calls for it all the time, but to give you a proper answer, I need to know your specific facts, and what makes it such an interesting profession is everybody's facts are different. So with that, I'm going to give my contact information, Jean, before you ask for it. It's Jonathan Lack with Lack & Lack Chartered, 321-953-5115, or on the web at LACKLAW.com.
And Carolyn?
Carolyn Wolf at 321-795-9103, or my email at carolyn@floridalendingpro.com.
And I'm Jean Newell, and broker associate with Waterview Realty. And you've been listening to Your Hometown Solutions, where we discuss everything from foreclosures to Feng Shui. And we have a good time doing it. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at yourhometownsolutions.com on the contact button, and we'll be happy to air your question. And please join us next week, and we're going to be talking about home warranties. Thank you, everyone.